again, I have no background at all in anything medical and certainly nothing about pharmaceutical drugs. But I did read a book recently. It was by a man named Ben Goldacre, and he wrote a book called Bad Pharma, Pharma. And I was listening and I'm thinking, I don't know if I understand this. This doesn't even sound possible. This is what he said. He said that you could basically do a clinical trial that, when someone takes a drug, they take it because it's approved by the FDA to be safe. So that makes sense. So we go to take medicine under the assumption that it's been tested. So that sounds pretty good. So he's saying that you can be a drug company and do trials and just not count the ones you don't like. So if you do 7 trials and you don't like 6 of them, you could just pick out the one you like, which to me sounds like you would obviously get a skewed result if you kept out the results that you didn't like. Did I understand this correctly? Am I getting this information correct? Do you want to comment on that? Because it sounds like I don't know how anyone can count on something working if you're allowed to kick out whatever trials you don't like.
Yeah, I will be happy to comment on that, and he's absolutely right. And he's right in 2 ways. One has to do with the FDA criterion for drug approval, the efficacy criterion. Their criterion is there has to be 2 clinical trials in which the drug has been significantly better than placebo, statistically significantly. Now, in order to get those trials, the drug companies can do as many trials as they want. So they might do 7 trials and find 2 that seem to work. Or they might do 8 trials to find the 2 that have worked. The negative trials just aren't counted. They have to be sent to the FDA. The data has to be sent to the FDA. But the FDA criterion is there have to be 2 showing statistical significance. And it doesn't matter how small the difference is as long as it is statistically significant. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is in terms of what doctors know, what the public knows, what researchers know when they're trying to put all these clinical trials together and see what they can learn from it. And what happens is that the drug companies publish their successful trials, but publish very few of their unsuccessful trials. 40% of the antidepressant trials conducted by the drug companies in the process of seeking approval from the FDA for their antidepressant products were never published. And if you look at the trials, it is clear why they were never published. If you look at the published trials, 3 out of 4 show a statistically significant, albeit small, benefit for the antidepressant. If you look at the unpublished trials, only 12% show any statistically significant benefit for the antidepressant drug. They're under no compulsion to publish their data, with one exception. One exception is GlaxoSmithKline. Doesn't have to publish them, but it has to make them public. And the reason they have to do it is because they were sued by Eliot Spitzer when he was Attorney General of the state of New York. The state of New York sued GlaxoSmithKline for hiding the data indicating that their antidepressant, paroxetine, was ineffective as a treatment for depression in children and adolescents. They settled the suit, and as part of the settlement of the suit, they agreed to put all of the data on paroxetine online, the summary data of all their clinical trials, and now they are legally bound to do that. And at least you can find it there. They're still not published. And what are people going to rely on if you go to the medical literature to get your answers? Ben Goldacre, the author that Steve was talking about, has started a campaign to require the pharmaceutical industry to make public the results of all of their clinical trials, and has had some success so far, with some initiatives by the World Health Organization, among other things. I would urge you to support that campaign. I believe it's called the All Trials campaign.
One thing on the FDA approval, in some ways they don't even need two, really. If you look at the Zoloft trials, there was one that was effective out of 6, and the second one was they could find one dosage that was sort of, and if you look at the discussion, they're like, well, this isn't a very good standard, but it's what our standard is, so maybe we should pass it. I mean, it's a lax to one. The thing that I think the American public misunderstand about the FDA is not charged to determine whether these drugs are good for you. Right. Or good for the market. The question is, are they safe enough in the regard they're not going to kill you? And then the other risks are supposed to, or at least kill you in any great numbers. And then other than that, the FDA is to warn of risks. They're not assessing, whether those risks outweigh the benefits. So when they say safe, it just means safe in the sense that you're not killing people and the other risks are warned about. And then effective is just, as you said, it's an artificial effectiveness. It's like sort of 2 studies. And I say sort of because you see some bending on that, and you can have 6 or 8. And if you listen to the discussion, when you see some of these trials where they submitted 6 studies and 4 were failed, they basically say that's our standard. In other words, it doesn't really mean that the drug is proven to be, effective in what you mean by a scientific term. It means it meant a legal hurdle for approval, which is a very different thing. We do not have an agency that assesses whether a new drug is, on the whole, the benefits outweigh the risks.
There's something else you should be aware of when it comes to the FDA, and that is its source of funding. Do you know what accounts for 40% of the funding of the FDA? Direct money from the pharmaceutical industry. That's a change that first came into effect under Bush the Elder, his administration, and a law was passed. Before that, it was not allowed. There was no direct pharmaceutical funding of the FDA. A law was passed to permit pharmaceutical funding for the FDA, and the law said, among other things, that this money could be used only to speed up the approval process. It could not be used for safety monitoring. There was an article on this a few years back in the New England Journal of Medicine, in which, I believe it was an editorial actually, complaining about the shift in the tone at the FDA since this, over the period of time since this change in what was allowed in the way of pharmaceutical funding came into being. And there was testimony from one fellow who was told by his superior at the FDA that he was admonished that, well, the drug companies, they're our clients. And the subordinate said, well, gee, I thought the American public were our clients. Mm-hmm. And that's a shift, and that may give you some inkling of the current FDA stance towards drug approval.
I'd like to add to that from my experience as well, and that is that when I was training and we would go, I was a hospital rep and a specialty rep, so I very frequently got to work the conferences, which was supposed to be a privilege, but it was actually extra work. And so they would always make you mimic and parrot the company's byline so that you knew exactly what you were supposed to say, just in case that random FDA agent was somewhere coming by to talk to you and trying to catch you in, some illegal statement. And so that was the way that I was being trained in 1985 when I started in the pharmaceutical industry. And by the time this new relationship of the good old boys came to pass, I started witnessing that now they were no longer being referred to as our watchdogs. I was attending meetings where they would talk about our people in the FDA. And I would be like, wait a minute, we have people that work in the FDA? Oh no, you know what we mean, our friends in the FDA. They're going to take care of it for us. So they went from being supposedly the people that were going to be our watchdogs and were calling us on the carpet and keeping us, legally upright, to being the people that we were actually cohorting with and you know, colluding with, and they had a good old boys network that you found that many of the people, once they retired from the FDA, they actually came into pharma as consultants because of their relationships.